夠開會嘅法定人數亦都夠鐘啦。
Members, we have a quorum. Welcome to this 4-hour meeting of the Public Works Subcommittee. In 2016-17, as of the last meeting, we already approved 10 projects with a total funding amount of $52.9161 billion. Together with the 9 unfinished papers from the meeting on the 7th of June, we are going to discuss 11 papers today involving a total of $35.591 billion. If all funding proposals are passed, the total number of approved projects will come to 21 with a total funding amount of $88.5071 billion. Deducting the block allocation of $2.86 billion for land resumption and the computerization program, the total allocation for works projects will be $85.6387 billion, as I said. For the current legislative term, we approved 10 projects. I'd like to remind members that if you have any direct or indirect pecuniary interests on the items to be discussed today, please follow the requirements under Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure and disclose the nature of such interests. I want to call your attention to Rule 84 as well on voting arrangements in case of direct pecuniary interests. Item number 1, 786CL, Tung Newtown Extension, and we are looking at PWSC 2017-18, number 3. The paper recommends the upgrading of Part 786CL at an estimated cost of $20.5689 billion in money of the day prices. The item was discussed by the PWSC on the 31st of May and the 7th of June, and we will continue the discussion today. With us today, we have similar government officials. The attendance list has been tabled, so I won't read out their names. We have another Deputy Secretary with us, Ms. Cheryl Chow, who is responsible for planning and lands. In the last 2 meetings, 24 members already raised questions, and 8 of them asked questions for the 3rd time. I will now open the floor again for questions. In the last 2 meetings, we spent almost 4 hours. So for today, I will allow a short break in the middle of the meeting at around the 2-hour mark. I hope that the question and answer can be wrapped up within the first half of the meeting. According to Rule 37 of the ROP, our questions should be directly related to the public works projects. For policy questions, you can raise those questions at the council or panel meetings. In the last 2 meetings, a lot of questions were about facilities in Tung after the extension, including healthcare services. I understand that these are areas of concern, but right now we are scrutinizing a land reclamation project. For other planning issues, there is still ample time for follow-up at various panels. So I'd like to call members to this point. For policy questions or other questions about planning or facilities in Tung, it would be more appropriate to follow up on those at the relevant panels. You can also write directly to the government departments involved. So you have several options. Let's continue with the questions. Dr. Fernando Chung. Third round, 2 minutes. Dr. Chung. Thank you. For this land reclamation project, it includes a birthing area for yaks, and there's an OU zone right next to the birthing area. I'd like to know the size of this marina birthing area. How many vessels would it accommodate? And how much profit would be generated from the berthing? Deputy Secretary. We estimate that the berthing area can accommodate about 95 vessels. Because it would depend on the size of the vessels. But as we said earlier, the actual operation of the berthing area, we took in different views. Apart from these boats, it can accommodate different facilities. For example, a water sports center, etc. So there's still room in terms of planning on what facilities can be accommodated and operated. Chairman, my concern is we are spending so much money on the reclamation. We hope that the facilities can be enjoyed by the public. Unless you are very rich, you would not own these boats. If we are going to build such facilities with public money and we are allowing rich people to enjoy it at very low prices, I have to consider the ultimate beneficiaries, whether it would be the rich people or the ordinary public. Can the government give us a detailed response? How much space would be reserved for boats and how much would be reserved for water sports or shoreline? Deputy Secretary, thank you. As I said, on this berthing area, we have heard different views. As Dr. Chung suggested, we want to have more facilities that can be enjoyed by the public, including yachts and other facilities. So we have no concrete plans at this point. And the location is in Tung East, and there's still a very long time for planning. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, fourth round, 1 minute. Chairman. Well, I can write to the government any time of the day, but now we have a chance to meet face to face. So did C.Y. Leung write to Holden Chow? Once we, after we grant you the money, 4 years down the road, we might not be here anymore. We ask you not to build cheap leisure facilities for the rich people, but 4 or 5 years later, I might not be here. I might not be living altogether. So what do I do at that point? Should I send you a postcard? Your time's up. Mr. Leung did not raise any question. What I said was for wider policy issues, according to Rule 37 of the ROP, you should raise those questions at the council or panel meetings, because a lot of issues cannot be dealt with here. And some members have done exactly that by writing to the government, and those letters would be referred to the right government departments. And indeed, it's impossible to discuss wider policy issues at this subcommittee. Ms. Tanya Chen, fourth round, 1 minute. I'd like to ask about the eco shoreline. I asked about the plans last time. And I saw a lot of plans about foreshore and sea plans for the eco shoreline from your website. You might want to do something, but can you really build a mangrove, the nutrient levels, etc.? I hope you can give us more details on these. Mr. Robin Lee, Project Manager from the CDD. This is the first project adopting an eco shoreline. And there's a wealth of international experience, and we visited Australia earlier this year. Basically, the purpose of having an eco shoreline to incorporate different designs, including mangroves, sandy beaches, or seawalls in artificial shorelines. We want to encourage marine species to congregate at these areas. Ms. Chan talked about mangroves. So there are several factors to the survival of a mangrove. First of all, the alkalinity of the seawater and freshwater, and towards the west of Hong Kong, near the Pearl River estuary, the salinity is rather appropriate. And in Tung, west of Pt1, we can see this situation. And we want to identify quieter waters for mangroves. So at Tung Chung Bay, we identified a relatively quiet area. So when we design the heights, well, if the shoreline is too high, then the species would not survive. So experts have looked at the issue, and at Q3 this year, the CEDD would introduce 6 species to see which of them are suitable for Tung Chung Bay. If such diagrams or plans are not available on the website, can you provide them? Yes, it's possible. Next, Mr. Ray Chan, third round, 2 minutes. The Tung Chung East Reclamation Area, and there's an area called Other Uses, Residential and Public Transport Interchange, and it will be the tallest building in Tung Chung. It's next to the Northland Howe Road. The administration said a new railway station might be built next to the reclamation area, so will become another residential project. Will it be taller than other constructions or buildings in Tung? Would it be private or public housing? Deputy Secretary, I think Mr. Ray Chan is referring to Area 113 in Tung Chung East, adjacent to the Tung Chung East Station. In our planning, this would be a metropolitan area. We want to develop commercial and residential projects over there. The location is quite central, so we find it appropriate to develop commercial facilities. It's located adjacent to the railway station. So at the public area, there will be a central green space. Whether or not there will be a railway development project, the THB is inviting the MTR Corporation to submit a proposal on a possible Tung Chung East station, but there are no specific arrangements yet. Will it be the tallest building in the district? Ms. Donatam, District Planning Officer. On this zone, we established a maximum building height. As the Deputy Secretary said, there will be comprehensive development in this area, including residential and commercial uses. We hope that the future planning will incorporate different building contours. Mr. Edward Yu, 2 minutes, please. On the reclamation method, it's very similar to the third runway system. DCM would be employed for the third runway system. There were incidents in which artificial sand contaminated the ocean. So has the government learned a lesson, and whether you will avoid a repeat in this project?
If you notice, the sand supply has been limited, and we have to use replacement, and there is a cost issue because it has to be cleaned. And then we have reports saying that the replacement sand has not been cleaned thoroughly, and there has only been 10 areas where there are monitoring stations, and when the sand is spilled, we cannot monitor in time whether there was contamination. So do we have any clauses in the contract to maintain that when sand is deposited, there is sufficient monitoring? Mr. Robin Lee. Thank you, Chairman. And Mr. Yu. The project only uses about a quarter of sea sand compared to the third runway. It's only about 5% of the third runway. So, of course, the sea sand supply, aside from mainland China, in the rest of Southeast Asia, we also have a supply of sand. And we have requirements of sea sand. And in our tender, we do allow for artificial sand, but we do specify the requirements. And we also require that it comply with the local legislation. And we also deploy staff to the country of origin of the artificial sand, and we also take samples of the sand to ensure that the sea sand and artificial sand meet our requirements. And if for example, if the granules are too small, they're smaller than 63 millimeters, we have a 5% tolerance. We don't want the sea to be contaminated and polluted. Previously, we had arranged colleagues to visit the third runway of the airport. We visited the DCM site, and they have a real-time monitoring of water quality, including the water opaqueness. So, Mr. Lee, could you elaborate a little bit? Because Dr. Yu Chung asked this question: how do you ensure that during the works you won't have contamination of the sea and so on? The reclamation, the scope of reclamation, when we have filling or sand filling, we don't want small particulates dispersed. So before we start the land reclamation, we have some nets, some filtering nets, and now Dongcheng Bay doesn't have the Chinese white dolphin, but in Wan, in the marine park, there are white dolphins. So we need to do some monitoring before we install the filter nets. So we have to restrict the vessel access. We have to restrict the number of vessels, the speed, and they cannot stop in the marine park, and the frequency. They cannot drop material into the sea. So all this has to be monitored during the project. We want to prevent the sand contaminating the sea and affecting the marine ecology. So when we start the project and during the project, we have an environment monitoring group to watch, to keep an eye on the water quality. Mr. Nathan Law. Yesterday we saw the Gini index 0.539, and the government response was that there is a need for cruise terminal. It's a terminal for rich people. Our colleagues say that want to take a look and see whether we can benefit the general public, and as a criteria for approving this item. In the past we talked about the cruise terminal and parking fees, and whether we could build more public housing. So I have two questions. I want to follow up on Lao Xiulai's question. She asked about bed space, and the government officials said they would have to refer to the relevant government departments. If you consider the increase in population in Dongcheng area, so a hospital bed space, even if we increase the Northern Langtao Hospital, we only have 350 beds. That's only 1.4 beds per 1,000. But the population, but the Hong Kong Planning Standard Guidelines says that we need to have 1.5 beds. So there's a large shortfall. So could you provide us with your view on this situation? So the government is seeking funding now, and reclamation is a big project. I think that this is in conflict, or it's overlapping with a lot of other major infrastructure projects, such as the third runway. So will they be in competition? So the works will lead to a large demand, and will it lead to overrun of the budget when the government seeks funding? Have you done such an assessment? Two questions. Regarding the need for reclamation, I'll hand over to CEDD. Mr. Law talked about hospital bed space. So the paper we presented today, we have consulted FEHD, and we had provided a written response. Put simply, the hospital authority will enhance its service, and it will implement other measures to ensure that the public hospital, public health care can meet public needs. At the CEDD, our work is to ensure that we have sufficient land supply to meet Policy Bureau, especially the HA, FEHD, in the provision of medical services development. In the Chung project, we have set aside sufficient government and land to meet this need. Mr. Robin Lee, in our project, at the end of last year, beginning of this year, we had also met with overseas contractors, and we had tested the waters regarding large reclamation projects. Because we need a specialized vessel fleet, we had a team visit South Korea and other areas. So we're confident in our tender that we will have sufficient contractors to compete and that they have a sufficient vessel fleet. I want to mention that in Dongchong Bay and in the third runway, now even though the work is similar, but the vessel fleet will be different because this bay is a shallow bay, and there's a Tunmunchilagok link, there's a bridge, there's only a 21-meter headroom for vessels. So the vessels that want to bid for the tender, they have to make some modifications. So we've given contractors 6 months advance time to prepare, and I think we have made the message clear. Mr. Eddie Chu, thank you, Chairman. Previously, we mentioned that public rental house and private housing ratio would be 48, 52. So this 52%, have you included commercial residential development and public interchange part? Yes, we did include that. How did you calculate that? Because if you look at the OZP, it doesn't mention how much GFA would be included. So how can you said have you calculated the 8 hectares or just part of it? I'll defer to Ms. Tam. In Dongchong OZP, we have a detailed recommendation where it is residential commercial use, and the estimate, we have estimated how much land could be used for residential and commercial use. We also stipulated the GFA for residential and non-residential use. So based on this data, we can do the calculations. Next, Tanya Chan. I'm looking at the OZP, the NBA in your supplement paper. It's for pedestrians, and because we don't see NBA too frequently in the OZP. Ms. Tam? Thank you, Chairman. I think Ms. Chan is looking at the draft OZP. That is a draft, and there are some urban planning suggestions. We suggest pedestrians, or we have set aside the non-development use. We also have a garbage refuse collection point. Why is it in the commercial area? And second, the refuse collection point, we have, in the LegCo, we have a committee, and I'm the chairman of that committee, the refuse committee. So should it be more than just refuse collection? It should be a recycling facility, because we don't have the ability to retrofit our current RCPs, and we would like the future RCPs to be like a to have recycling facilities. Okay, Ms. Tam. When we get to the detailed design stage, we can reflect your views to the relevant government departments. Next, Ms. Lau Xiu Lai. 1 minute. I want to ask questions about the tender. I want to know if there's how is the equation formulated in the tender, price, and what are the other weighting factors? And artificial sand was switched to sea sand, and there was a cover-up. So these contractors, will they still be allowed to bid in the tender, or will they face penalties? Our tender has a formula. First of all, we have a preliminary screening. They have to meet experience criteria to yes, I read that document. I want to ask if in other projects they had some scandals, they switched the sand, can they still participate? We have to refer to their experience. If they had done relevant technical, even if it's bad experience, as long as it's experience. So they, if the bridges collapse, they can continue to build bridges. We want them to comply with technical and the past experience, and in the grading, we have to look at it very carefully. Well, but we also have performance criteria. There's a grading. For example, in the past, their work performance score, that will reflect their quality, their work quality. I think, Chairman, the question was that during tender, will there be proven contractors that have not complied, and can they still tender? Well, we have to look at it case by case. Just now, Ms. Lau asked whether there has been a switching of sand. I'm talking about the third runway, where they took artificial sand and converted to sea sand. That's why I said it depends on the case. In the tender system, if we have contractors not qualified, they will not be able to enter the tender. Well, Chairman, I would like more time to follow up, because the Guangzhou-Zhuhai Macau Bridge, they had the bridge collapse, and they can still participate in the tender. So how do we screen them out? Well, just now the Secretary had answered, and he said that in the tender they do look at past performance, where they had non-compliance or injuries and accidents. Well, if you have a specific question about sea sand and artificial sand, so let me use this opportunity to have government officials clarify that. As far as I know, it had not been confirmed that there was a switch of sand. When we visited the site, they said that artificial sand was also acceptable. It doesn't matter. We can allow the officials to respond. Mr. Han Jikang. And then I can defer to Robin Lee. I don't understand what she was referring. I thought she was referring to the Guangzhou-Zhuhai Macau Bridge. Well, whether we have actual proof or not, we have to look at it case by case. And in the tender, we have to look at the factual proof. where we have to look at the past performance, whether it was confirmed, and we should not have a detailed discussion about individual contractors. And I'll defer to Mr. Robin Lee. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Lau. Ms. Lau is probably referring to a newspaper report that in the third runway, it said that they had used artificial sand, and I see that the airport authority had made a clarification. But coming back to our reclamation project, how do we ensure the construction quality? Just now, our colleagues had mentioned that in the tender, we have 2 levels. We have a screening. Some basic criteria have to be met, and if they cannot comply with that, we don't even look at their tender. And this is related to experience and so on. And we also look at their resources. Second stage, when we vet the tender, we have to look at their technical quality. Now, past contractors, if their past performance is one consideration, of course, other technical considerations are also in place. So, hypothetically, if a contractor, if they had a poor performance, or they could have breached some rules, but it wasn't proven, but they can still tender. We have to wait for facts to be proven, a conclusion, or the government might have suspended them from tendering for a period of time and they cannot participate during that period. We have a mechanism in place, and we're just complying with practice. Of course, when they have won the tender, the bid, there is a product quality monitoring. Thank you, Ms. Lau. Could you respond in writing? I want to know, in this tender, in the second round, the formula, when you say performance, how much weight does that consist, and what criteria are you looking at? Mr. Leung Kwok-hong. Chairman, I don't know what you're talking about. If in the civil service a person has been fired and they cannot be recruited again, there's more than one institution that they can tender around the world. I don't know what you're talking about. The world has changed.
Okay, in the first round, if he's screened in, and then in the second round, we have no idea as to what your scoring system is like. So can you tell us this? All right, if a civil servant has been dismissed while he's working for a particular bureau, then can he turn around and then applies for a new job again? But then on this occasion, we're talking about life and death. So I'd like to formally ask you to withdraw the paper. So I'll be invoking the relevant rules of procedure to ask you to withdraw that paper. Can you be more specific about your proposal? I'd like to move a motion that is in accordance with the PWSC rules of procedure. I'd like to ask him to withdraw the paper. All right. So you'd like to invoke para 33 to request that the discussion be terminated. Do I need to read that out? Okay, so we know that already. Okay, in accordance with rules of the procedure of the PWSC, Mr. Leung Kwok-hong is asking us to asking the administration to withdraw the paper under para 33. So, Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, you may now speak. Well, other than looking into cost effectiveness, we also need to look at opportunity cost that's been raised some 30 years ago. So if you're doing this, then you will not be able to do another project, and there is no turning back, because time just flies. So I'm not going to debate with you about cost effectiveness, even though you have had cost overruns and so on. Well, you've been talking about the commercial residential center, and if you do that, then you'll not be able to build other things. So once you build the cruise terminal and the related facilities, and you won't be able to use the site for other purposes. So for the damage done to the environment is permanent. It cannot be reversed. So apparently you're saying, well, Chairman, you're saying that we should discuss that later. What we are discussing is something that the entire community has no idea about. So coming back to Tung, I think it's a disgrace. It's a total disgrace, because initially we were told that it would be built into a community with over 200,000 population. But then subsequently, the bubble bursted, and then Michael soon said that he would just abandon the plan. So what we have discussed apparently has gone down the drain, and still you put up that grind in your face. So you're going to spend some $20.5 billion on the reclamation, and then you come up with some 135 hectares of land, and then you're going to sell the land. How much you're going to get from that? So if the flour is expensive, then the bread will be expensive too. So what's the end product? So people would just be able to buy the yacht and then anchor it there. So are you telling us that you should not be filibustering, because we have to build other things and we have to build many things? But then are you going to build a hospital there? Well, in my constituency, NT East, all right, 2 hectares of land has been rezoned, and then 1 hectare has been used for building luxurious flats. All right, Gini coefficient 0.539 already. So what about the opportunity cost? Once you make the mistake, then the Gini coefficient is going to go up further. So will you be able to suppress the Gini coefficient? Is that achievable? So you've been blaming us for standing in the way, but then once these are done, there is no way of turning the clock back. So that's why we've been arguing about which should be done and which should not be done. All right, if you look at the Hansard and also the transcript, you would at least have an idea as to what was discussed and debated. All right, several decades ago, when you told us that there would be 280,000 people in Tung, we already knew that if you don't do that, then nothing can be done about it. Dr. Fernando Chung. Well, Chairman, I'm speaking in support of Mr. Leung Kwok Hong's motion, because for the proposal here in Tung Chung, we understand that we need more land in order to allow more people to move in. But then for the project here, we're going to have 130 hectares of land, and then we will have a population of about 120,000. But then as to how the land is going to be used and how it can help the average citizen, I'm really very worried, because we have no planning. There is no planning for medical facilities. For example, Ms. Lau Siu Lai and Mr. Nathan Law have been talking about the HKPSG. Well, we have already been lagging behind with an aging population, and for the Tung Chung Hospital right now is already far from adequate in serving the community, and with over 120,000 people moving in, and by the time when they start to move in, the elderly population would already account for some 20% of our total population. In other words, we will have about we will have about 25,400 old people, and if just 2% of them have to be hospitalized, and if you look at the elderly homes, well, we are talking about 6 to 7%, and even if I adopt a conservative approach, then for 25,000, we will need to have 1,200 beds for the elderly in the elderly homes. But then, according to your calculation, there will only be 300, and so Tung Chung will not have anything. So we are already having some over 100,000, and then in the future we're going to have over 300,000. There are no facilities for the handicapped, no sheltered workshop. There is no residential care home for moderately mentally handicapped, and also there is no children's home for the mentally handicapped, and so on. So there are no supported homes for the handicapped. So when I try to look at the schedule, none of these is there, and yet is going to become a community with over 300,000 population. So all these facilities are not included. Then how can we support you? So given the fact that this is a large-scale reclamation project and you've already planned for yacht and also luxurious apartments and residential developments, and yet for the disadvantage, none of the facilities that they will need will be there. So how can you call that a comprehensive planning? So to me, you have not given any thought to the disadvantaged, or even for market facilities. Well, after a lot of pressure has been put on you, you said that you would be prepared to consider it. So I really hope that they can go back and give a second thought to this. Because for welfare facilities, well, they should give us a new plan. All right, please continue. Next, Eddie Chu, 3 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I haven't really thought through as to how I should vote on this motion, but then thanks to Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, we at least have a chance to discuss it, because even if this project is passed today, it will still have to go to the FC, and then at the FC, what we are most concerned about, well, I'd like to elucidate that here. Well, from the time when we discussed that at the development panel, I've been most concerned about this. That is, the administration should enable the community to understand this. That is, when we do the reclamation project here, on the one hand, we are putting capital cost. On the other, we are actually doing this at the expense of the environment. So there is also this environmental cost, and yet the administration has never quantified the environmental cost. All right, with the new land formed, the administration should have come clean by telling the public that in your mind how you came up with the calculation. All right, you've often adopted this approach, Chairman. That is, okay, this part is about infrastructure, and therefore infrastructure has nothing to do with other parts of development, and then you're talking about town planning, and then you're talking about sale of land. In fact, honestly, how can the Development Bureau not have a comprehensive planning as to, for example, how much will be put into developing this site, and then after the land is sold, how much will be yielded from the sale, and then how much would go back to the capital reserve fund for infrastructure projects, or to plow back to this or to plow back into this capital reserve fund. Even for those of us who are not experts, we know how to do the calculation. Then how can the administration not be able to do it, even though you're the experts? So we have done the calculation. All right, $20 billion investment, and then you'll be able to get $150 billion from the sale of land in the future. So we will have to decide, do we need to sell that much land in order to inject into the capital reserve fund, or else, so what is the benefit to the community then? The benefit is that there will be more land available, so that the public, as many members have said, would be able to have affordable housing. And now if you look at the ratio, ultimately we're talking about private housing accounting for some 52% of the total development. So after a lot has been done, after the environment is sacrificed, still 52% will be going into private residential development. So as we have seen, for the land that has been given to the private market, well, the housing will not be affordable to majority of the community. Ms. Lau Siu Lai, in fact, I haven't really thought through as to how I would be voting, because for the site that is developed, if there can be more public housing that can be used to improve the living for the grassroots, then of course I would like to press ahead with that. Why would I want it to stop? But then we need to have comprehensive planning so that we would know exactly what will be put up there before you can apply for advance funding for that without any idea as to what is going to happen. I'm sure you have the plan, and yet you are not it's just that you're not telling us. And we are very concerned that in the new town, how are people going to live? So will we be selling them off? That's why we have to be very cautious about your overall plan. And I'm sure we will still all remember, because we have seen that as headline news, and this is really a tragedy. Well, a husband tried to kill his wife because he didn't want her to continue to suffer. And then after a while, he had been taking care of her. And also, the 76-year-old woman was suffering from chronic illness, and therefore the husband killed her, and then he turned himself in. And therefore planning is very important. Do you have hospitals? Do you have elderly centers? Do you have community care? Do you have community facilities? That's the reason why we have to reclaim the land and build a new community there. And also, will people be able to find jobs in the local community? Because I see that you have planned for a lot of commercial developments and shopping centers will be built. But then what kind of shopping centers are they going to be? And will they be able to create jobs so that people will be able to work in the same community? Or is it that it's going to be like ghost towns? So if people are sold off and then there is no job available, and then they will have to be on the dole, and then they'll be labeled as living in a poor community. I don't want this to happen. That's why we want you to have comprehensive planning so that you can tell us the details, and then we will decide if we want to press ahead with the reclamation, because there are a lot of risks. As Mr. Eddie Chu said, there would be environmental risks, and therefore that has to do with how you're going to put that out to tender and how you control the contractors to make sure that he will not commit irregularities and so on. That's why I was asking these questions. So what's the formula and what's the distribution, and also are you going to look at his past performance and what's the breakdown and what's the score to be given? I think this is very important. After we have done everything, we can ensure that for those moving in, they'll have a good quality life. I think that's very important. So for the 3 minutes that I've used, I'd like to make sure that you would be submitting the right information instead of just telling us that this has nothing to do with the planning. In fact, the planning will determine whether or not we will go ahead with the reclamation. So I'm grateful to Mr. Leung Kwok Hong for giving me the 3 minutes, because we need you to give us more information so as to help us to decide. Next, Raymond Chen. Thank you, Chairman. I didn't know that this is an adjournment debate. Okay, so this is an adjournment motion moved by Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Well, whether or not this is passed today, I think I have 4 motions under 32A, so I'd like to express my views very clearly under this motion. I think members are most concerned about the fact that part of the site will be used for building anchorages for yachts and so on. So these are people with high income, so I'm not sure if any of us here will be able to afford it. So please, I'd like to urge the administration to consider not doing this, and that would also scale down the reclamation site, and that would also save cost. And earlier on, I was also concerned about noise problems, and I would be moving one of the 32A motions, and then I would ask you to ensure that after the reclamation, the noise nuisance would not affect the residents who move in. So you should not be that aggressive. You should scale down the size of the reclamation. So I think, well, what if it's scaled back by about 500 meters or even 1,000 meters? Then what's the impact on the overall scale of your reclamation? But then, as far as my concern is, as far as my worry is concerned, because we don't want to see a repeat of the Ma Wan incident. Last time, I also asked about the mud transportation problem. Given the fact that I don't have a lot of time to go, well, last time, Lam Sai Hong said that you would be using barges of 5,000 tonnage, and also part of some of the mud would be transported by land in order to reduce marine traffic. But then, with regard to the headroom for the Hong Kong-Macau-Zhuhai Bridge, will there be enough headroom for the large vessels? So have you considered the navigation channels, and will there be trucks transporting the mud to the site? And you're also talking about a cap on the number of loads or hauls going into the site. So please do give us more details. And if you were to use barges, then you're talking about 56 barges every barge trips every day. But what about transporting it by land? Would it affect the residents nearby? So please, before going to the FC, please give us the details. Next, Andrew Wen, 3 minutes. Thank you. I think the difficulty that I'm facing would be similar to that faced by other colleagues who have spoken. They are nodding their heads. This is not the first time, Chairman. So we've been given partial information, and often a time they would just submit such proposals, and then we would be squeezed. We would be hard pressed, and we would be put in a dilemma. Well, if you look at the questions that were raised by members just now, they were all reasonable questions, and once you got the approval, then things cannot be reverted. That's our problem. All right, you're spending over $20 billion, and then you're reclaiming the site. And if you look at the housing ratio, apparently you're really not taking care of the majority of the population. All right, with regard to the 63 to 37 ratio, so you're talking about subsidized housing, not really public housing. And if you look at the latest information, well, the distribution is actually 48 to 52 with regard to private to subsidized housing. So still somewhat less than the original proposal. So my question is, why are you not considering Tung as a whole? Because in certain areas, the administration might be thinking that, well, we'll be considering the district as a whole. So in terms of subsidized housing, why can't you raise it? So that the community would have this impression that for the administration and for this council in approving funding, they would be more concerned about the majority of the public. And also when I look at the yachts or the mariners proposal, I think this is not really very pragmatic, because members have been asking, well, why don't you put up more facilities for the public? So I think they are very pragmatic, well, for those from different age groups, and also can you be more balanced? But then when we try to probe, when it comes to community facilities planning, well, it's on the weak side. And recently we have had some tragedies in the community. So we've been asking the administration to do more, and on this occasion, apparently the administration has tried to do somewhat better. But then in terms of community facilities planning, you have not been doing your job. And then once it's completed, over 200,000 people will be moving in. And so I would be extremely worried because of the imbalance in the past 20, 30 years. We have had incidents whereby there would be many tragedy cases in a particular area. But then for this particular district, whether you are the have or the have nots, if there are a shortage of community facilities, then they will be very they will be having a hard time.
Dr. Edward Yu. From members' questions and some of the answers given, they are becoming even more confusing. And in paragraph 26, it talks about area 113. And it's now annotated OU residential commercial uses with a public transport interchange. Very often public transport interchanges are included in residential and commercial zones. Why did you create this zone called OU residential commercial and public transport interchange? And the outline zoning plan has to be submitted to the planning department. Apparently, you created a lot of new practice. I often meet your colleagues outside of LegCo, and they told me that area 113 is a buffer area and no residential developments are possible. But now, according to the paper, it says OU brackets residential, so I'm very confused. I think we need to have a frank discussion on the on Area 113 and the details. Otherwise, we would not know what is going on. So why another department is doing the vetting? The practice is that the town or the town planning board would be the gatekeeper on the zoning plan. But why did you make that change? And now you are handing over to another department. Why did you invent a new system for this project? You must explain why you made that change. We need to know what you're thinking. So, why are you deviating from the CDA system? Or why did you make the switch from CDA? It used to be a CDA zone. Mr. Roy Kwong, 3 minutes. Chairman. If the government is trying to increase the supply of public housing, or if you are going to enhance the ratio to alleviate the very long waiting list, the current ratio of 63 to 17, out of 43 hectares of land, 23 hectares are for private housing. Some members asked about why a marina is provided. It should be developed into public housing instead. You should just look at Hong Kong's housing policy. How much do the properties cost nowadays? A one-room apartment in Tsuen Wan costs more than $5 million. In the long-term housing strategy, you promised 230,000 public housing units, and where are you at? The ratio has not been enhanced. I'm not even talking about public housing. There will be 23 hectares of private housing. What's going on? You should think about the needs of those on the waiting list. You should not build a marina. I think more should be done on housing. This is a dilemma. You might say that otherwise the site for public housing would have been gone, but you should consider what's going on for public housing. You said that public rental housing is part of the housing ladder, and it's pegged at 70% of the market price. For every time you release HOS flats, it's always oversubscribed, and can you do something about your housing policy? So what can the grassroots do? A one-flat apartment costs more than $5 million, and people are have waited 30 years for a unit. You should have more public housing units. You failed to reach your target, and you refuse to change the ratio, and that's all. Mr. Nathan Law, 3 minutes. Thank you. We are at pains whenever we discuss projects that benefit the public because the government is not giving us any choices. There are a lot of problems. Not all the facilities serve the public or the grassroots. So whenever we discuss the issue, we want to make improvements, but the government refuses to offer more flexibility. So they are forcing us to either support or reject the proposal. But in principle, we do not object to the project. If the environmental implications are acceptable, we are not against reclamation, but we hope that the reclamation can narrow our poverty gap. From this project, we can see that even if we can tackle the land shortage in Hong Kong, you might not necessarily be able to tackle housing. We continue to face a lot of housing issues because of uneven distribution of land. So land might not be a primary concern. Housing is the key issue here. We did some math. For reclamation and infrastructure, it might cost more than $30 billion. If you sell the metropolitan area, well, it's more enough to offset the costs. If you also include private land, you can make $100 billion. If you just sell the commercial area and metropolitan area, then you can balance the books already. The infrastructure costs are way too high. The projects all cost at least $100 billion each. If you do not balance the books at the Capital Works Reserve Fund, how can you support other projects? So this points to uneven distribution of land. The government said they are adopting the long-term housing strategy, but the key here is not the ratio. More than 200,000 public housing units are yet to be built. We really want to support this project. And now you said of the 63% of public housing, 70% are PRH. Can you further raise that ratio? Can you create more affordable housing by converting private housing into public housing and PRH into HOS? Mr. Wilson, all. I object to the motion to abort this item by Mr. Leung Kwok-hong. Property prices and rents are high. The waiting time for public housing is getting longer and longer. If I support this motion, then the subsidized housing units could not materialize within this project. Members always talk about challenges, but if you ask me, if we can approve these projects as soon as possible, at least we are addressing calls from the public. We have been discussing this project for a very long time. And the public has complaints about the single-story buildings. I hope that the administration can consider if this project is not passed. Well, Hong Kong's housing issue cannot go away. I hope that members can be kind and stop filibustering. Chairman, I speak against Mr. Leung Kwok-hong's motion to abort, and hopefully other members can do the same. Mr. Oden Chow, 3 minutes. Thank you. The Hong Kong public wishes to solve the housing issue. We have to enhance the long-term housing supply, and the Tung New Town extension can benefit nearly 120,000 people who move into Tung Chung East. After 3 phases of public consultation and approval by the district councils, the opposition now wants to abort this item. I think every member can raise a lot of concerns, including myself. transport measures are one concern, and as to why the Northland Hospital does not have enough specialists to meet patients' needs, well, there are plenty of concerns. However, if you want to abort the entire project just because your concerns are not lifted, then how can you hold yourself accountable to our future generation? This is an opportunity to solve our housing issue. Of course, there are concerns, and we will request the government to tackle them. But you should not try to jeopardize the entire project just because of those concerns. Some members said the commercial zone should be converted into residential development instead. But you talked about encouraging people to work in the same area. If there are no commercial zones, how can you encourage residents to work in the same area? Are you asking them to spend a lot of time commuting every day? Or are you going to build offices and commercial buildings there? Chairman, I'm against Mr. Lam Kwok Hong's motion to abort. I think we must continue with this project, and we cannot abandon the project just like that. Mr. Yu Si-weng, 3 minutes. Chairman, we've been talking about a lack of housing, and they've been talking about more PRH, more HOS in order to benefit the grassroots. The reclamation exercise at Tung serves to tackle this problem. I don't know why members try to stand in the way by using different excuses. So what does this motion serve to do? Do you want to abandon this project so that you will have an excuse to blame the government later for not doing anything? Is that the result we want to see? Sensible discussions are needed, but you shouldn't come up with so many excuses to stand in the way. For the marina project, Hong Kong is an international city. We have a lot of investors living in Hong Kong, and they have different lifestyles. In our neighboring Zhuhai, Nansha, they are also building marina clubs. And they are building facilities to appeal to investors. So we shouldn't just talk about millionaires. These are just facilities. Summer is coming, and you see a lot of people on yachts, and they are not tycoons. So where do the yachts come from? They are owned by leisure companies, and they need a space to berth. So you should respect different lifestyles. So this is not necessarily a conflict between the tycoons and the poor people. The marina will accommodate just about 100 yachts, and they do not just accommodate yachts. And in the future, Tung will have various tourism and other facilities. So this is just part of those facilities. I hope that the government would not shelve this plan of having a marina. On the other hand, they should try to improve the planning. For the elderly and persons with disabilities, should more facilities be introduced? The government should not shelve the plan. Dr. Helena Wong, 3 minutes. Chairman, on the Tung Newtown extension, the Democratic Party supports the program. But this project has dragged on for quite some time. The pro-establishment camp criticized the opposition. They said we are trying to stand in the way of the project. I think they have twisted the this entire discussion on the Newtown extension. When we approved these projects, there are concerns about the new population incoming on the healthcare, transport facilities, etc. I find these questions reasonable because the people who move in will find that the specialist services are lacking at the hospital, etc. The government never showed us the big picture in terms of planning. That's why we had a lot of questions, but those questions left unanswered. There's a lack of communication between different government departments, so it's always bits and pieces. In the past, members might not have much to say, but nowadays when we talk about planning, it's about the needs of the residents. Can the government change their mentality? For future Newtown extensions, you should offer a big picture to members. That way, we will know how many people will move in, and we can accommodate facilities on healthcare, education, transportation, etc. You should come up with promises. I hope members would not skew the our discussion so far on the Newtown extension. Most members would want this project to be passed so that the public, but we just want the public to know that we care about the facilities. Hopefully the project can be passed as soon as possible. But I haven't heard any solid commitments from the administration, so we will abstain from voting on this motion.
Any officials who wish to respond? Let me respond briefly. Thank you, legislators, for your concern. The Dongchong East land reclamation is in line with our long-term planning study. We had 3 rounds of public consultation, and we met the statutory planning procedures. We want to add 130 hectares of land resources such that Dongchong can have a better planning and it can have a balanced development. Now in Dongchong East land reclamation, we can provide 40,000 housing units, more than 40,000 job opportunities, and other new community facilities, including 2 mass transit stations. We understand that legislators, regarding land use or other facilities, they would have requests. We heard that, and from now till we have completed the land use planning, there is room for taking on board more of your input. So I hope regarding the Dongchong East item, we can continue the discussion and endorse it as soon as possible such that we can provide the land to meet society needs. Mr. Leung Go-hong, you have 1 minute to respond. the pro-establishment, it indicates that they are ignorant and maybe they don't have a full attendance. What Mr. Leung Go-hong, your terminology is not appropriate. I've made a ruling. Well, fallen angels, they fall from grace. So the angel that has broken wings, they fell from grace. Well, you don't read the documents, you don't know what we're talking about, and you criticize me. I am against, I was against Mr. Xunming. It was 9 measures. I was against Link Reed. Okay, time's up. I'll now put this item to the vote. Mr. Leung Go-hong. Mr. Leung Go-hong. Do you wish me to not handle your motion? It's not your speaking turn. If you continue, I'll have to ask you to leave. I'll now put the motion to the vote. That is, we want to adjourn PWSC 2017-18, document number 3. Those in favor, please raise your hand. Call for a division bell. Mr. Holden Chow calls for a 5-minute division bell.
The gaming.
而家咧係
Please take note. We now need to put a vote to Mr. Leung Kok-hong's motion according to ROP 33A to adjourn this agenda item. Okay, we now put the item to the vote. Before I announce the end of the vote, please check your vote. We'll now stop and display the results. 33 in attendance, 5 for, 19 against, 8 abstentions. It's been negatived. So let's continue the discussion on this item. I've noticed that members are going to submit 32A temporary motions. I received Ju Hoi Dik and Fernando Chung and Chen Ji-chun said he has 4 motions. So I said that we would have a short break at the beginning, and so before 11, please hand in your temporary motions, and I'll review your temporary motions during the break. I note that we still have 4 members who wish to speak. This item, including the previous meeting, we've spent 5 hours on it already. So those who wish to speak, please press the button, and I need to draw a line because we have to handle the 32A motions. Now, according to my practice, even though I've drawn the line, and let's say members who have not spoken, I will allow them a 4-minute for their first speech, but for other members, you'll have to queue up in the queue. I remind you once again to press the speak button. So I see we have Dr. Kok Ka-ki, Eddie Ju, Dr. Fernando Chung, Leung Kok-hong, Helena Wong, Chen Ji-chun, and Yu Chong-yin who wish to speak. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, you can consider whether you want to speak. We now have 7 in the queue. If nobody else wishes to speak, I'll have to draw the line. Okay. Helena Wong, the first time to speak, 4 minutes. Chairman, I want to follow up on the Newtown education, welfare, and hospital facilities. The Newtown and new PRH, our experience from the past is that there are problems with the planning and standards and guidelines. The planning standard and guidelines say that for every 1,000 enrollment, for every 1,000 people, there should be 750 half-day enrollment space, but only 250 are full-day. So I had communicated with the Education Bureau. We had mentioned that in the education panel, and we'd like to adjust the planning standard and guideline. For every 1,000 enrollment space, there should be 500, that is half, for our full-day enrollment quota. So I had mentioned that on numerous occasions, but the Education Bureau blames the Development Bureau, so they can only plan according to the current guidelines. So this new town, have you amended the planning standard and guidelines? Ms. Tam? Well, our planning is the planning standards and guidelines, and I understand the Education Bureau are following up on Ms. Helena Wong's comment of amending the planning standard guideline ratio. So we're saying we're complying with the current standard, but if necessary, if we need to provide more land resources to accommodate with the amended planning guideline, we have sufficient government land to do so. So you are still using the old standard. We're using the current standard. It's under review. I had talked with the Education Bureau. They agreed. In black and white, they wrote me and said they think they support my view, and they should adjust it to 50-50. So you cannot say that they are under review. You want to blame it on Education Bureau now. Well, the planning standard and guideline is drafted according to the relevant bureau policy. We will follow up with the Education Bureau. We're still in negotiation stage. We are aware of Ms. Helena Wong's concern. We will follow up with the Education Bureau. Well, I hope the government can follow up on this. I'm concerned because when I go to Kaiting Estate, when I go to these new estates, the parents, the housewives have to send their kids to school, and they have no opportunity to work. They cannot work because you only have half-day kindergartens. They have to spend time picking up their children, sending their children to school. That's why I say you need to change the standard and guidelines. Otherwise, when people move into the new estates, the housewives cannot work. They cannot bring an extra income to the family. They cannot adjust their work-life balance. So you should not pass the buck between the two bureaus. So I think Ms. Wong's opinion is very clear. We've heard different government officials convey the message that it is an ongoing project, and they are using the current standards, and even the public-private residential ratio is using the current guidelines. And but if there are changes in the planning standards and guidelines, the officials say that there is sufficient land to comply with the new standard. Okay, next, Fernando Chung. 1 minute. Chairman, this land reclamation will increase a population of 120,000. If you include the existing population, Chung will have some 300,000 people. Chung Hospital is very limited. Have you communicated with hospital authority? Will you make it a general hospital? And I also refer to the elderly, handicapped needs. Will you negotiate with labor welfare about this influx of population? Well, as we responded in the written document, North Langtao Hospital, we've set aside land for expansion, and regarding the expansion of land and services, we will follow up with Hospital Authority and FEHD. Mr. Chung referred to other social welfare facilities. Aside from planning, we've already set aside land according to planning standards and guidelines. So, in the development panel, we have taken on board views, and we're following up with the Social Welfare Department and providing more services. We are under discussion. Mr. Chan Ji-chun, 1 minute. You can answer and reply if you can't answer verbally. Sai-hong said that they would use 5,000-ton vessels to reduce maritime transport, but it was not made clear how much land transport would be used. In the EIA permit, there is a limit of 56 vessels per day, but are there any restraints for vehicles? And the traffic routes, will it affect the residents and the environment? And is there any limit to the size of vessels? Mr. Lee, can you respond to that? Mr. Robin Lee. Thank you, Chairman. That is correct. In the environmental standards regarding maritime transport, there is a limit. They cannot be more than 56 vessel trips per day. Our initial estimates at the peak in the first half of 2021, it will be the peak. We estimate there will be some 30-plus vessels. It's lower than the standard. In our EIA report, we recommend that when vessels pass through the marine park, the speed can only be 8 knots. Compared to 10 knots for other marine parks, it's still lower. We will follow up. After the tender, we will recommend to the contractor. We'll give them specific instructions regarding road transport. When they deliver material, the number of trips, we will negotiate with Transport Department, and essentially we will have to match the road capacity of Tung. We have to do assessment before approving that. Before any construction, we also need to have a maritime traffic impact assessment and also route planning.
If at all possible, as we can see on both sides of the marine park, there would be sufficient space available for vessels to pass through without having to pass through the marine park. And even if they pass through the marine park, they are not supposed to stop or anchor. Next, Eddie Chu, 1 minute. Chairman, I'd like to follow up on the remarks by Professor Edward Yu. That is, well, why is it that in the third stage consultation is still shown to CDA? In other words, in the course of development, there will be they will need to apply to the Town Planning Board for approval, and now it's been rezoned OU, and the substance is the same, and the only difference is that they have circumvented the approval procedure by the TPP. So who made that decision to rezone it into OU? Who is to answer the question? Yes, Ms. Tam. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Honorable Chu, for your question. With regard to the cosmopolitan downtown area in the Tung Chung extension zone, well, in the OZA, well, it's been shown to CDA, and by that we mean that it will have a comprehensive development with residential, commercial, and other facilities, including a transport interchange and other community facilities, etc. So that was just an OZP. But then what about the third stage consultation? So did you receive any suggestion from the MTRCL or property developers so that you rezoned it? Well, I think she is resorting to Silver Street, and she is saying that it's not a CDA. Well, I've already asked the official to respond to your question. Yes, please continue. With regard to the mode of development and also the overall site management and so on, and also the future development direction, we have already included that in the OZP, and it's been submitted to the TPP for consideration. And of course, the TPP has taken into account different views, including how it's it should be developed, and also the management mode and so on. And it has also looked at the other zoning proposals and so on. So concerning the zoning under the OZP, we have already gone through the statutory procedure. In the end, it was approved by the TPP. Thank you. Next, Professor Edward Yu, speaking for the 4th time, 1 minute. Yes, I'd like to follow up on the zoning of OU just now. You said that you already follow all the statutory procedures, but then can you explain in detail why did you have to invent this new zoning of OU? Because for residential and commercial developments, they were already there. So why did you not resort to the conventional way of zoning it as a CDA? Thank you, Chairman. In fact, this is not a new invention. In zoning it into an OU in different areas and different locations, we have already adopted that zoning. But then OU, commercial, residential, and BDT is set a common zoning. Yes, let me explain. Well, for OU, other uses, well, that can include anything. In fact, it can include other different types of uses. It depends on the planning intention of that particular area. And then under OU, in the bracket for the land zoning and so on, we will look into the detail. Well, you already have R, so what's the point of zoning it into OU and R? This is self-contradictory. Well, Professor Yu, I think Ms. Tam has already repeated the answer to your question. That is under the current planning procedure. They've already got this practice, and this is not really rare. I think the answer is very clear, and if you have any comment on the planning procedure, you can take it up after the meeting. Who else? Tang Kwok Hong, speaking for the 6th time, 1 minute. So what's meant by OU or other uses? Well, on the face of it, you can see it immediately. Oh, you're so cunning. That's what it means. Alright, you said that you had already done it. Why didn't you give us examples or precedent cases? And if you've already done it many times, then it shows that members have not done their homework. They have not really read up everything. So why can't you just give us something in writing? So for other uses, residential, if you've already got other precedent cases, then why don't you just zone it residential? You said that it can include residential development and many other things. So if you can give us other examples, then you can just circumvent our monitoring. I think this is what is done by the magician David Copperfield. Alright, he is trying to mask something up or cover up something so that nobody would be able to see it. Alright, I'm declaring, okay, whatever happens in Chung, please don't blame us, because by the time when you complete the development, I might have gone. I might have passed away. So if Hong Kong people are made very poor, and then they can only beg for endowments and other gifts from you. Nothing can be done about it. I've already drawn a line, but then as I can see it, there are 2 more members who have already spoken when I drew the line, but then they've already spoken for the 5th and 6th time, so why don't we allow them to speak for the last 1 minute, okay? Well, I'd like to specifically suggest this because when we started the meeting, we were told that we could ask questions until the end of the first part of the meeting. If that is the way that we are going to go about it, then we should not be confined to the last 1 minute. Yes, I have to allow for some members who have never asked questions to ask questions. Okay, Dr. Fernando Chung, you have pressed the button, so you're speaking for the 5th time, 1 minute. Thank you, Chairman. Well, this planning still leaves or set aside 8 hectares of land for commercial development. I noticed that in Tung, right opposite it, there is a very large artificial island, and on the artificial island, there would also be a very substantial piece for commercial development, and in Sunny Bay, it's also going to be developed into commercial and recreational uses. So for commercial land, can it be scaled down so that you can have more community facilities and public services? I suspect that we do not need that much commercial developments there. So part of it can be rezoned so that more community facilities can be put up there. Ms. Tam? Well, for the commercial site planning, well, the main purpose is to provide a balanced development in order to meet the needs of the community there. I think that's the idea, because these commercial facilities will be able to create jobs so that more residents will be able to work in the same district where they live. As to other development projects in Lantau, for example, the Honourable Member also referred to the commercial development zone to the north of the airport. Well, that's for retail and hotel development. But then in Tung East, the commercial site would be for office accommodation. So we try to reduce the duplication, and we would also like to create jobs for different types of people. As to whether or not it can be rezoned for other commercial or community facilities, well, in doing the zoning, we have to look at the location in providing the most suitable land use. What about Sunny Bay? Well, there will be reclamation, and there is also going to be a lot of commercial developments. Well, Sunny Bay's planning is still in its early stage. We still haven't got a very specific plan for the zoning there, and therefore we can only take into account sites that have been planned for or projects that have been implemented before we finalize our planning for Tung Chung. Eddie Chu, speaking for the 6th time. 1 minute. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, I still would like to know more about the logic behind the zoning of OU. Because, well, one thing follows another, okay? In zoning it into a CDA and in zoning it into an OU, I can see that the critical difference is that whether or not you will have to go through the TPP again. So is it that you think that by allowing it to go through the TPP again so that the public will have a chance to speak again is not good, and therefore you would only be responsible for giving an account to the Lands Department? Is it what you think? Well, with regard to Tung Chung East, other use zoning, well, precisely because this is a reclaimed land, it's going to be a new development in the future, and therefore on the mode of development in the future, it's going to be developed as a private development, and therefore in the future lease. Well, are you not answering the question, Chairman? You're not answering my question at all. So can you be more specific in your question? My specific question is, well, your decision is to zone it into either a CDA or an OU. I think it's a flip of the coin. So in deciding that it's an OU, is it that you think that by turning it into a CDA, you will have to go through the TPP again, and you think this is not a good thing, and therefore you've decided against it? Is that the case? Well, as I said, in the future lease, there will be very detailed clauses mandating its management mode and so on. So we have to look at the town planning requirement and its future development intention, and also the building height and so on and so forth. And everything can be included in the lease conditions so that the future developer or the lease lessee will be able to submit the detailed plan to the Lands Department in accordance with the OCP. So this kind of control mode has been included in the OCP and it's been approved by the TPP. Chairman, I think she is still avoiding the question. So the Lands Department is not a body that is responsible to this council, and therefore in approving the submission, it will not be turning to us for our views. But then for the TPP, they will hold public hearings, and then the public will have a chance to represent their case and so on. I think you repeated your question already. I think she is not explaining the question at all. So Ms. Tam, I'll give her another chance to respond to your remark. So why an OU instead of a CDA? Chairman, as I just said, this is a new development, and this is a piece of reclaimed land, and therefore, under an existing mechanism, in other words, the developer will be required to submit details under our future land lease, including building height and town planning and land use, and everything will have to be subject to very detailed management by the Lands Department, and therefore, with regard to the future development on the site, the developer will be subjected to the supervision by the Lands Department. That's why we believe that this is the correct zoning. Next. Well, she pressed the button after I drew the line, so Lau Siu Lai. So I'll have to give you some time to process the para 32A motion. Okay, so after I've allowed Ms. Lau Siu Lai to speak, we will take a break of 10 minutes. So, Ms. Lau Siu Lai, speaking for the 5th time, 1 minute. Well, this is not a question, Chairman, because before we discussed the adjournment debate, I was pleased to hear from the official that they welcome our views on the planning, so that you'll be able to incorporate those views in the planning, and then you'll be able to do a better job. And then I've been asking about the increase in hospital beds and also the community facilities, and also everything should be tied in and better coordinated. But then within this community or within this town, you will have to set aside some land for a bazaar to be set up, because the future chief executive told me that she would be prepared to consider this. But then if you look at the package of facilities, well, they are very duplicated, and they might be contradictory to one another, and they have not really reserved any site for a bazaar. But then in Tung, there are a lot of wet markets and shopping centers which have been monopolized by the link, and after moving in, the residents will not have a lot of choices in terms of their shopping, and therefore I hope that there can be a site set aside for a bazaar. And in the community, I can see that you have set aside a lot of sites for PRH developments. I hope that these tenants will be able to make a living on their own, and there would also be affordable commodities available, so that they'll be able to have local community economy, because they don't have to wait for the big consortiums to create jobs for them, and still they will be able to make a living within the same community. So please do consider that. All right, this is a comment for the officials here to note. Okay. So we'll take a break of 10 minutes, and then we will be back at 11:05, and then we'll deal with the 32A motions. So we have received 11 now, and I'll take some time to look into them. Thank you.